After America is made on the lands of the Kire-Wurrung, Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Bunurong peoples. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Angus Blackman, and this is After America. The northern winter may start this month, but it was a few weeks back that the Trump-mobile appeared to hit the ice. Republicans were getting hammered over the longest government shutdown in American history, and Trump was copying it for his Epstein Files hypocrisy, making the administration look perhaps the wobbliest it had since taking office. But it was inexplicably given a boost by breakaway Democrats, who handed the GOP an end to the shutdown without securing anything much in return. And then Trump hit the gas. He flipped on the Epstein Files, but got rid of the increasingly troublesome Marjorie Taylor Greene in the process. He called female reporters piggy and ugly. He's escalating hostilities with Venezuela, he says, over drugs. And yet he's set to pardon the former Honduran president who was actually convicted for drug trafficking and weapons charges. It's outrageous, and it remains to be seen if it'll work long term. But the content president does suddenly seem more comfortable behind the wheel again. This week, we're taking a little step back to discuss Trump's statement from just a few weeks back, which is wild in itself, that the US would be resuming nuclear testing. But before we do, the latest book from Australia Institute Press is available for pre-order now. A Time for Bravery, What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage, features essays from Yanis Varoufakis, Senator Fatima Payman, John Hewson AM, Craig Foster, Amy Ramakis, Barry Cassidy, and much more. The essays examine what bravery looks like in Australia and how it can reshape our future for the better. Usually available for just $35.99. Use the code SAVE5, that's SAVE5, at checkout to save $5. The offer is available for a limited time only. Pre-order it now to get it in time for Christmas at australiainstitute.org.au/store or via the link in the show notes. So, to talk about nuclear weapons and the dire state of healthcare under Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Emma was joined by a friend of the show, Dr. Ruth Mitchell. Ruth is a board member of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, which actually won the Nobel Prize in 2017. She's a neurosurgeon at the Sydney Children's Hospital and the Prince of Wales Hospital, and the chair of the board of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. We started by asking Ruth about her recent trips to Nagasaki and Hiroshima, in what is the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings of those two cities.
This is a really special year, an important year for people in Nagasaki and in Hiroshima, and in the whole anti-nuclear movement, because it's the 80th anniversary year of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so, not surprisingly, a lot of the organizations that do work in this space thought this was the year for our meetings to be in Japan. And so it was an absolute privilege to be part of the World Congress of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which was in Nagasaki at the beginning of October. And I'd never been to Nagasaki before. I've been part of IPPNW since I was a first-year medical student, and for me it was transformative to go to a congress in Beijing 21 years ago. So the most encouraging thing for me about being in Nagasaki was seeing all the medical students that had come, because they are in this stage where they're trying to decide what their career and what their life in medicine is going to be about, and what their life as a professional, and a public person is going to be about. And I think it's really important for people to have a sense of belonging and context in a community of people who want the world to be a better place. The other thing that's really significant about Nagasaki, of course, is that when you go to somewhere where people live who survived those awful bombings in 1945, you get to still talk to the first generation survivors of the hibakusha. So in Nagasaki, we got to hear from the hibakusha. And what you start to realize is that some of these people have been working on this for literally all 8 decades since they were children, and began to appreciate what had happened to them and why members of their family, members of their classmates, their friends had died or become very unwell in the wake of the bombings. So the use of nuclear weapons and the human impact, it lasts like forever. And so seeing the impact on the lives, the bodies, the communities and the countryside as well of places like Nagasaki is really important. So bearing witness, I think, is what I've been doing a lot of, I guess, this season, and listening carefully to these narratives and these stories, like from the bedside, from the life of someone who's endured the shame, the stigmatization, the health issues, the grief, the loss of the use of nuclear weapons by the United States 80 years ago. That lives on.
Mm.
That was the meeting in Nagasaki, and it was personal highlight, I guess, was being reelected as the chair of the board of IPPNW. So they're stuck with me for another few years. But I do really enjoy that. And I think what's special about IPPNW is it's a worldwide federation of doctors and medical students and other health professionals who have a shared goal of seeing a world free of nuclear weapons. And so seeing new hope and new life come from places where we haven't traditionally had affiliates, having medical students show up and say, right, well, I want to get it started in Uganda, like, let's go, things like that are really powerful. And we're seeing increased leadership from the Global South. And it's also great to see more and more women and LGBTQIA plus individuals getting involved in the leadership of the organization as well.
Yeah, that's so positive. I mean, in the face of what is happening from leadership, particularly in the United States, because as I understand it, perhaps as that meeting was happening or in between the conferences that you were going to, that was when President Trump on Air Force One said that nonsense about resuming nuclear testing because everyone else is doing it, or however he put it.
The United States has more nuclear weapons than any other country. He goes on to say,
because of other countries' testing programs, I've instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis.
They seem to all be nuclear testing. We have more nuclear weapons than anybody. We don't do testing. We've halted it many years ago. But with others doing testing, I think it's appropriate that we do also.
North Korea is the only known country to test nuclear weapons over the past 2 decades. The U.S., China, and Russia all stopped in the 1990s.
And these will be non-nuclear explosions.
The White House is clarifying President Trump's push to restart nuclear testing after a 30-year pause.
With our science and our computation power, we can simulate incredibly accurately exactly what will happen in a nuclear explosion.
What was that like, given where you were? And
the second meeting was right after that statement was made, that, terrible, irresponsible pronouncement. No matter what he meant, it was the terrible thing to say. And we've seen at both of these meetings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki the witnesses of people who've endured nuclear testing. And that's the other part of the nuclear equation, is that it's not just that the US dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. It's about the hundreds and thousands of nuclear tests that have occurred since then. And the thing we have to remember, because often I think we feel some sort of moral superiority living here in Australia, that we're not part of this, but we're absolutely part of this for 900 reasons. But one of them is because we had British nuclear testing on unceded sovereign Aboriginal land, in the South Australian desert and also in the Montebello Islands. And these are really significant amounts of destruction. If you want to talk in terms of the quantity of fissile material, many of these tests were more fissile material than was dropped on Nagasaki or Hiroshima. And if you want to talk about the human impact, the people who describe that the best are our First Nations people, elders who've been working in this space and who we try to pass the microphone to as much as we can, who really help us to remember that it's not just the health of those, it's not just the people who die right away, it's not just the health of this generation and the next generation and the one to come. It's the contamination of the earth, the disruption of the food cycle, the loss of sacred sites, land, air, water is all contaminated. And that has health, environmental, and spiritual consequences. So we have to remember that that's the cost of nuclear testing. And also that wherever they've been tested, disproportionately nuclear tests have affected Indigenous communities, and also that nuclear weapons have a disproportionate impact on the bodies of women and girls. So this is such an intersectional issue. It's a feminist issue, it's a justice issue, it's an issue around racism and colonization and, and it's all just this ridiculous penis contest. It's like, well, they're doing testing. I would like to also do testing. I mean, that's literally, I don't even know what Trump's briefing was, because in the statement that he made, there were many mistruths. So he talked about, oh, we have the most nuclear weapons. You don't. That's Russia. He mischaracterized people's testing efforts. He's really doesn't have an accurate picture of what has and has not occurred.
No, well, I mean,
in the
clearly
last
doesn't even
decade.
understand that like all of the architecture for that kind of testing has long been dismantled in the United States.
That's right. Oh, and then the other thing was, I think he wanted the Department of War to get on with it. And actually, that's not the right department. I believe it's the Department of Energy who would be, that's their remit. Like, he doesn't even know where to file this nonsense. It's unbelievable.
It is. It's wild. But I think a lot of it comes from people in his administration. You know, there's so much in Project 2025 about, strengthening the US nuclear arsenal. So this is all being fed to him. But then I guess the question for me becomes, Ruth, like, given that it is just, a dick swinging contest that he's constantly engaged in, it's just him kind of throwing these ideas out and then promptly forgetting about them. Given that, but also given, the seriousness of this issue, how concerned are you about that statement, and how much focus was there from your colleagues at these meetings on this? Like, how seriously should we take this, I guess, is my question.
The best framing of this I've heard is like, the road to hell is lined with people thinking, oh, he's just said something silly again, and not thinking it can't have very serious consequences and implications. And so I think, you look at what's happening in American cities right now, other than like New York, which just had an inspirational mayoral election, and a number of other mayoral elections have also had very inspirational, progressive, thoughtful outcomes, which are about making cities livable for humans and community-minded, kind of a human security lens coming through very strongly there, which I celebrate and applaud and welcome. More of this, please. But I'd say the other part of it is that, the context where that's become so necessary, is that ICE are picking up people and basically disposing of them. Like this, I grew up in South America, and this is starting to feel like, Pinochet's Chile, or, people are being disappeared. People are being lost in the system. No one knows where they are, including children. This is very, very dire. And all of that also started with, okay, let's, this kind of like glib rhetoric of like, oh, let's just, clean up the trash or whatever. And this is, the consequences of that deeply unserious thinking are very serious for human beings. And so, unfortunately, I don't think we can afford to dismiss Trump's kind of instinct that he'd like to see some nuclear testing, even though he doesn't actually know what that is, because it hasn't stopped him before that he's not appropriately briefed or oriented to any of these policy areas. I mean, I don't know if a bull in a china shop is the right analogy, but, every move he makes has a massive impact. So I think there's a lot of alarm.
Yeah, gosh. I think you're absolutely right. And I actually wanted to ask you about that. I'm really glad you brought up the, mass deportations program and immigration as well, because anecdotally, what I'm hearing from colleagues who work in international spaces is that the rolling effects of that are quite significant for, I guess, the nature of American power, because what it is doing is meaning that, for UN conferences, for example, that are often based in New York, people who are attending or wanting to attend those conferences are not being granted visas, like, are not being able to come to the United States for those international conferences. And so they are, being quite quietly moved elsewhere. What is your sense of where power is, or how it is shifting, and also how your American colleagues are coping and responding to all of this?
Well, massive shout out to the members of our movement who live and work in the United States. I mean, they're really doing it tough right now. Our head office for IPPNW is in Boston, and the current political climate makes it challenging for things like fundraising. And, we have decisions to make as we think collectively about, if there's a meeting at the UN, who should we really be having there? Because in the past, if you have a meeting of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or one of the meetings of the states parties of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, particularly the TPNW MSPs have had a large civil society voice, because this is a treaty that came into being largely because of the work of civil society. And that's what, we at ICANN got the Nobel Peace Prize for in 2017, is for being the main civil society partner in that work that brought that treaty into being. So there's a significant role for civil society in that, alongside diplomats from around the world. But if we're seeing diplomats, like, heads of state having their US visas canceled, which is a huge violation of the agreement the United States has with the United Nations. If you're going to host the main office, the global headquarters of the United Nations in New York City, then there's an understanding and an agreement that there are responsibilities that go with that privilege. And that means you have to let, like, the diplomats and heads of state in. And so canceling the visas of very significant, whether it's diplomats, heads of state, and now we see the cancellation of visas of other public figures, Nobel Prize winning authors. This sort of stuff is super chilling. And it now means that, in practical terms, I don't feel like we can advocate for having a big crew of, like, doctors and medical students from all over the world who look as diverse as they are, showing up in New York, knowing what happens to people who aren't, like, literally the color of a hotel towel, at the hands of ICE. Like, it's terrifying. And so I don't want to I feel a duty of care as the chair of the board, particularly to our medical students, and we always love having medical students at these international meetings. And I don't really feel good about saying, everyone, let's go to New York. We're going to have a great time. I don't think that's a real thing. Like, I feel really frightened for that. So it's super chilling. So what we find ourselves advocating for is, can we move the third meeting of the states parties to Geneva? And I think when it comes to where is leadership coming from, and where are we going to see, where can we still have conversations? Increasingly, it's not going to be in the United States. Last time we spoke, I was getting ready to go to a meeting in Chicago, and I was really torn about whether I should travel to the United States. My statements and opinions on things do not redact well from the digital record, and they are not complimentary to the current administration. And while that trip went off without incident, I have a feeling it will be my last trip to the United States for a while, because things have shifted in, a terrible way, even since July. I was in Chicago. Since then, there have been all kinds of deportations and lots of ICE action in Chicago itself, in neighborhoods I walked and ran through, and I think very carefully about putting myself or other activists and advocates in those spaces. And so I think it is timely and serendipitous that, as the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPPNW, one of the best things we've done in recent years, and since our last Congress, which was 2.5 years ago, is we now have an office in Geneva. So which is super great, because it means we have this, like, little kind of embassy almost. We have like an outpost. We have a liaison office there, and it means that the UN agencies and other international organizations that have their offices in Geneva, we can interface with so much more readily. And of course, the most significant of those is the WHO. And so we actually have been able to really strengthen those connections. And so now there's a body of work that is going to be done, partly because we've advocated very hard for it to happen, renewing the report on the health effects of nuclear weapons at a WHO level. And you have to get that kind of thing through the World Health Assembly, and that's not, like, easy to do. But we've been able to participate in all those discussions and lobby effectively in that space because we have a presence in Geneva. And I think that's probably where we're going to end up catching up more often. And I think it would be great if we could have some of those big UN meetings there instead of in New York, for that reason. And of course, there's challenges there too. Not everyone can always get a visa to go to Geneva, but nobody's worried they're going to end up in, El Salvador. So it's a different level of challenge.
Yeah, it's pretty grim. And I mean, I guess speaking of grim, you were speaking there about the consequences on the ground in the United States of what is happening and how that's radiating outwards and being projected outwards. But of course, another consequence of what is happening on the ground very much relates to the physician part of your work, and that is the way that the Trump administration is attacking healthcare in the United States.
Got milk? Some U.S. health leaders say the answer should be a resounding yes.
HHS Secretary RFK Jr. set to unveil new guidance encouraging more saturated fats in your diet.
There's a tremendous amount of emerging science that talks about the need for more protein in our diet.
But if you look at what's going on in the world with health, and look at this country also with regard to health, I like the fact that he's different.
Do you believe COVID-19 was politicized?
Yeah, the whole process was politicized. Senator, I mean, we were lied to about everything.
Secretary Kennedy, are President Trump and the medical community right? Or do you still believe that the COVID vaccine was, quote, the deadliest vaccine ever made?
No, first of all, I didn't say that. I said that in terms of affairs reports a while ago. I said today, I think that President Trump should get the Nobel Prize.
So who's right? Is Trump in the medical community right, or are you right?
President Trump did an extraordinary piece of leadership.
We've spoken quite a bit on the show about the shutdown and how that was driven by a need, really, to extend Obama-era tax credits for health insurance, and that hasn't happened. Democrats appear to have just kind of caved on that issue. What's your sense of the consequences of that and the long-standing issues with US healthcare and access to, affordable care?
Well, I think, all of us in our respective spaces have to acknowledge that there are forces that are driving the bus that are not human-centered. So, here in Australia, we have to realize that the way that people are conducting themselves with regard to like environmental policy and energy policy has got nothing to do with what humans need or what the planet needs. It's everything to do with special interests, lobby groups, and what resource companies think is fair and appropriate for them and their stakeholders. And there's been this great capture of both of our, federal parties. And in the same way, there are such strong corporate interests that drive the way healthcare happens in the United States. And we have to spend time thinking about this because we have to make very sure that we don't allow that to be what happens in this country. Because it is still the case, although our health system here is not perfect, and there are serious access issues, which are to do with class, geography, race, colonization, and gender. And there's so much of a postcode lottery in terms of what access you have to healthcare in this country. But we do have so much good, and we must shore it up and strengthen it with everything that we have in our, beings. Because what we see in the United States is bad, like going to worse, greater health inequality than has been the case in the past, which was already like completely at the bottom of the league table for the OECD countries, greater maternal mortality, all that sort of just awful stuff, which is fixable with healthy public policy. But you have to put human beings first in that equation, and that's really never been the case in any version of the equation in the United States. And so for me, like, one of the most illustrative moments was when they had this press conference in the Oval, I think it was in the Oval Office, certainly at the White House, and there were executives from one of the pharmaceutical companies talking about reducing the price of weight loss drugs. And one of the people in the room, a somewhat more elderly gentleman, collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And I've looked at about 8 different versions of the footage of this just because, like, I was like, is there anything else that distills this better? And what you see is Trump just standing there, like, just kind of peering at this, but not moving into a helping mode in any way.
No, he barely even
And
reacts. It's
like
wild.
barely, did he even notice? Like it wasn't what he was there for. He wasn't there for someone who was falling apart. He wasn't there for an American citizen who's just collapsed. Like he's having a press conference ostensibly about health and healthcare, but the person in the room with having the bad health thing happen right now is the least of his worries. It's the last thing on his mind. It's an irrelevance. It's an inconvenience.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that was interesting in at least one of the clips I saw is, where's RFK Jr.? He's walking out of the frame. He's walking out from behind a group of people, and he walks in the opposite direction of the man who's collapsed. This is the person for whom health is meant to be poor business. And I know it's terrifying if you see someone collapse and you're not medically trained. I get that. But I was, not long ago in an airport and an elderly man collapsed right before he boarded a plane.
Mm.
And my non-medical friend walked towards it, rendered whatever assistance he could, and then shouted for me to come and join him.
Mm.
And so that's what decent people do. Decent people who care about other people walk towards someone who's collapsing to render assistance of whatever kind they can.
Yeah.
And maybe that assistance is just supporting someone while they sit down on the floor. Maybe it's calling for help. And there were a number of good people doing that in that press conference that day. But you see, the person who's most, has carriage of health in this massive, big, wealthy country, and he's walking away from the collapsing person.
Yeah.
And that's what the whole system is doing. It's walking away from the sick, the vulnerable, the acute and chronically unwell, and walking towards the news place for now we're changing the location for the press conference. That's
Yeah,
what's happening.
it's
And
wild.
so it's all about the photo op, and it's not about the people. It tells you everything.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it? And it's not even just the walking away. It's the I think actively making people sicker as well. I think it's so important that you mentioned RFK Jr. and his role, because I know, we talk about him a bit, but he's, as you say, kind of busy making Ozempic cheaper, but also telling people at the same time, like, really cool and normal things like to eat more saturated fats. Like, what is going on here?
And occasionally he'll come on a health message that's like appropriate, but it's like kind of in the way that a stopped clock is right twice a day. Like, it's not like there's a unifying philosophy of health or well-being that he's working from that one could like use to guide their life. It's very troubling indeed. And it's a repudiation of evidence and of science, as we've spoken about before, the defunding and underfunding of so many of the key pieces of US apparatus, which provide leadership at a global level for feeding the planet, for healing the planet, for advancing medical science. There's so many research groups who are on the brink of a significant breakthrough in one or another very significant disease who have had to close up shop. And there are instances where research has been defunded, and then 8 weeks later, it's like, oh, we got your funding back, but it's too late.
Yeah.
Because people had to pay rent and buy groceries for those 8 weeks. So, it doesn't take long for a research lab to close up, for everyone to have to move to some other setting in their lives and move back home with their parents or whatever, right? Or leave the country. That's the other thing that's happening. Like, not insignificant numbers of academics, whether it's scientists or social scientists or, a whole range of fields are leaving the United States to go to other places.
Mm.
It's a great loss to the United States, but a huge boon to places throughout Europe, China, huge beneficiaries of those great minds.
Mm.
It's so short-sighted what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, the landscape is changing really quickly, isn't it? I did want to ask you, I guess, finally to wrap up, Ruth, about how maybe the landscape isn't changing, because of course Jeffrey Epstein is dominating the news, and I don't want to get into the details of that for fairly obvious reasons. But one of the things that has come up for me a fair bit is Epstein's relationship with Larry Summers, who is the president of Harvard University. And it just reminded me then, I was reminded of it in the way that you were speaking about that press conference in the Oval Office, and the way it was all men, it was all men in this space dominating the health space, which of course, disproportionately affects women and minorities. And so really, I guess, Ruth, I just wanted to kind of check in with you about how you're responding to that news about Epstein and that close relationship, that was all about treating women like objects and keeping them out of male-dominated spaces and powerful spaces.
I think anyone who's been through higher education as an opinionated woman has experienced, if you're a difficult woman, it's,
I don't know what you're talking.
I don't know who I'd be referring to. Anyway, if one was one of those sorts of creatures, you know, because you come up against it, that there's all this misogyny baked in, and that there's so many people in senior leadership roles. Like, it's not just Larry Summers. Like, it's not, oh, sure, it's not all men, but it's quite a few. It's quite a few, you know? It's quite a few that have a baked in sense of entitlement, that imagine that they can do whatever it is they wish with whoever they want simply because they exist. And part of that is because they exist as a man. And so, having encountered various different rounds of that, and because I'm the person people come to when they've had, you know, something horrible happen, very strong older sister, camp counselor energy here, you know, this is what happens. You're the holder of all these stories. So you know that there's a lot of like really predatory and sick behavior that happens. And it becomes more pernicious when people become more powerful. So the more senior you are, the less checks and balances there are in your behavior, the less accountability. And that's the case in lots of sectors. So we shouldn't be surprised to discover that that sort of thing is fostered and promoted within Epstein circles, and that would include senior leadership of a, you know, very reputable university. We shouldn't be surprised by that. And I think if people have been listening to women for any time, there's no surprises here. You know, and so people are like, what's in the files? I'm like, why don't we just talk to all these women? They're telling us their stories. Like, I don't think we need to wait for this like cachet of, you know, this cache of like, this dossier is not where the story is. The stories are already being told. And the trouble is that people seem to need like something about these files like is necessary for that to be given some sort of external credibility. I'm like, what if
such
we
a
just
white man
believed
way
women?
of looking things. Yeah.
Right.
If it
What
wasn't
if we
written
just-
down, it kind of happened. Yeah.
Correct. Why don't we just maybe try believing women as for a change as an experiment? Let's give that a go. And then we might find out just how pernicious and how pervasive these problems are. And it's not limited to a single network of particularly diabolical individuals. You know, we have to take responsibility for the culture and the communications and everything that happened in the places that we spend time in. This is all of our work to eradicate, you know, everything from casual sexism to true pedophilia. This is everybody's business. Like, we're in this together. And listening to women is a very good start, and listening to victims and survivors.
It is, and you know, continuing to be a difficult woman, I think, is incumbent on all of us. So thank you, Ruth, as always, for being a wonderfully difficult woman. I am here for it always.
Thank you, and thank you to you for the same, Emma.
It's a pleasure. Thank you again, Ruth. It's always wonderful to have you on the show, and can't wait to speak to you again soon.
Looking forward to it. Take care.
Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode. Just a reminder that you can save $5 off our latest book, A Time for Bravery, What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage, with the code SAVE5 for a limited time only. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. You can reach out to us via our email address. That's podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. And if you want to read any of our research on international affairs or any other issue, you can visit our website, australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Wednesday, the 19th of November. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation, and we'll be back next week. I'm Angus Blackman. Thanks for listening.